No one ever noticed the man who kept the lights on. They noticed the glass towers, the polished floors, the executive smiles. They noticed the people who walked loudly through rooms, shaking hands and claiming credit. But they never noticed the systems humming quietly beneath it, all or the man responsible for them. That man was me, Ion Malik. I was the one who decided which doors opened and which stayed locked, which cards worked, which elevators moved, which cameras blinked green instead of red. I didn't sit at the head of the table. I didn't need to. I designed the table. I learned early that real power doesn't announce itself. It waits. At home, my life looked just as stable as my work. From the outside, my marriage was calm, respectable, even enviable. My wife, Zara, and I had been together long enough to understand each other's routines. We shared meals, shared space, shared history, but not silence. Silence had crept in slowly, like dust on furniture no one used anymore. Conversations shortened, eye contact faded. She laughed more at her phone than at anything I said. When I asked how her day was, her answers became efficient, polite, processed, empty. I didn't accuse, I observed. Trust, to me, had always been simple, not blind, not controlling, just bounded. You don't test a locked door if you respect the house. You don't cross lines if you value what's on the other side. I believed that if you give someone freedom without boundaries, you don't get loyalty, you get entitlement. Zara had changed her schedule recently. Later nights, new confidence. Different clothes, subtle things. The kind people dismissed because confronting them would mean facing something ugly. I didn't dismiss them. I archived them. That was my nature. .com. Disciplined. Watchful. At work, executives trusted me without ever remembering my name. They assumed systems just worked. They assumed access was permanent. They assumed someone else was always responsible. They were wrong, because everything, absolutely everything, runs on access. I'd seen careers collapse because one credential expired. I'd watched million-dollar deals stall because one approval was revoked. Powell didn't scream. It clicked softly and moved on. At home, I started to feel like a guest in my own marriage. Zara wasn't cruel. That would have been easier. She was distant. And distance, I'd learned, is where betrayal begins long before it arrives. Still, I said nothing. Not because I was weak, because I was patient. People mistake silence for ignorance. They think if you don't react, you don't understand. They don't realize some of us are simply waiting for the full picture before we act. I trusted systems. I trusted patterns, and patterns never lie. As I watched my life from the quiet edge at work, at home I reminded myself of a truth I'd built my career on. Everything runs on access. Remove it and everything stops. I just didn't know yet which door would close first. The building looked like a monument to excess, walls of glass, chandeliers, suspended like frozen fire, music low enough to feel expensive. This was where power gathered to admire itself. The company's annual celebration wasn't really a party, it was a parade. Executives in tailored suits, partners in shimmering dresses, laughter rehearsed just enough to sound effortless. People here spoke in polished tones, each sentence designed to signal importance. I didn't belong to this world, and that was fine. I moved through the room the same way I moved through my work, quietly, deliberately, unnoticed. No one introduced me unless protocol demanded it. When they did, my title landed softly and was quickly forgotten. Security systems, someone said once, already turning away, as if the word explained nothing that mattered. Zara didn't stand beside me. She had drifted toward the center of the room, toward the light. She looked different tonight, more assured, almost untethered. Her smile was sharper, her posture straighter. She laughed freely, like she'd already decided where she belonged. Then he arrived. Victor Hale didn't enter rooms. Rooms adjusted to him. Conversations bent. Laughter grew louder. He wore confidence like an inheritance. Men wanted his approval. Women noticed his attention. The CEO. I watched him the way I watched systems, without emotion, only calibration. He shook hands, delivered charm, absorbed admiration. Untouchable was the word people used for men like him. I understood why. Power creates gravity. When he reached Zara, the air shifted. He smiled at her longer than courtesy required. His body angled toward her, dismissing the circle around them. She mirrored him instinctively, leaning in, brushing hair behind her ear, a gesture I hadn't seen in months. I waited for her to look back at me. She didn't. Someone attempted to introduce me. "This is Victor," cut in smoothly. "We'll talk later." His hand was already guiding Zara away, like the rest of us were furniture. The introduction dissolved. So did my presence. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a clean, practiced dismissal. The kind powerful men didn't realize was insulting because no one ever challenged it. I felt it then. Not anger, awareness. Zara laughed at something, he whispered. Not polite laughter, real laughter. The kind that leans forward, that exposes teeth and trust. I recognized it. I used to earn it. People around me kept talking, but their voices blurred. My attention narrowed. Patterns began forming. The distance between Zara and me, the ease between her and him. The way his hand rested briefly at her back, testing territory. The way she didn't move away. I could have stepped in, claimed space, raised my voice. Instead, I watched. A woman nearby smiled sympathetically and said, "These events can be overwhelming." Her eyes flicked toward Zara, then away. She knew. Everyone knew. Another executive clapped me on the shoulder. "You must be proud," he said, nodding toward my wife. "Victor has an eye for talent. Talent." The word landed hard, sharp enough to sting but not enough to draw blood. I returned a thin smile, said nothing. Silence isn't absence, it's restraint. As the night continued, I noticed something else. Zara stopped checking her phone, stopped scanning the room. She was no longer aware of me at all, and that was when the unease settled in. Because when someone stops looking back, it means they've already decided to leave. The moment didn't arrive with drama, it arrived with certainty. I saw it in the way Victor leaned closer, his voice low enough to feel private despite the crowd. I saw it in Zara's eyes when she met his too steady, to open, like a decision had already been made. For a second, her gaze flickered across the room and landed on me. Our eyes met. It lasted longer than accident, shorter than apology. There was something unspoken in that look, not guilt, not fear, recognition. As if she knew I understood exactly what was about to happen, and chose to do it anyway. Victor offered his arm. Not a question, an invitation. Zara hesitated just long enough for people to notice, just long enough for me to hope she wouldn't. Then she took it. The room didn't go quiet, but my world did. Sound dulled, faces blurred. I stood still as they walked past me, her perfume trailing behind like a memory being erased. Someone laughed nearby. Glasses clinked. The party continued, indifferent to the fracture it had just witnessed. I reached for my phone. Once it rang, unanswered. I waited, tried again, straight to voicemail. That silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Around me, eyes pretended not to see. Some failed, a few watched openly, curiosity outweighing courtesy. This wasn't a private mistake. It was a public exit. Zara didn't look back. The doors closed behind them with a soft mechanical click, the kind I'd heard thousands of times. Controlled. Final. I felt something rise in my chest. Not rage, not even heartbreak yet. It was a pressure, like standing behind glass while something important drifted out of reach. Every instinct told me to follow, to demand an explanation, to reclaim what was being taken. I didn't, because reacting would have made this about emotion. And emotion was exactly what they expected from a man in my positions: small, embarrassed, loud. I was none of those things. I stood there while the party swallowed the moment, while whispers traveled faster than sympathy, while people silently chose sides without knowing the whole story. Someone touched my arm. "Are you okay?" a woman asked gently. I nodded, not because I was okay, but because composure was the last thing I still owned. Inside, images collided. Late nights Zara had explained away. The new confidence, the distance, all of it aligned into something sharp and undeniable. This wasn't temptation, this was departure. I walked to the edge of the room and watched the city through the glass walls. Cars moved below, headlights weaving like veins of light. Life continued. Systems ran. Doors opened and closed for people who never considered who controlled them. I understood then what hurt the most. It wasn't that she left, it was that she did it, believing I was powerless to stop anything that followed. She mistook my silence for absence, my restraint for defeat. I took a breath. Slow, measured. Some betrayals demand confrontation, others demand clarity, and clarity, I knew, would come in the morning. I left the building alone. The night air was cool, indifferent. The city didn't ask questions, it never does. It simply exists, running on routines and rules, caring little for personal disasters. I walked without urgency, my footsteps steady, my breathing controlled. I didn't chase them. That surprised even me. I sat in my car for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching reflections move across the windshield. My phone lay face up on the seat beside me. No messages, no calls, just the quiet hum of a system waiting for input. My father used to say, if you act in anger, you hand control to the other person. He wasn't a loud man. He fixed machines for a living. He taught me discipline the way others teach, aggression through patience, repetition, and restraint. At work, leverage was never about force. It was about timing, about understanding which switch mattered, and which ones were just noise. You never pulled a lever until you understood what it powered. That lesson came back to me now, sharper than ever. I drove home the apartment feeling larger without her. Her shoes were by the door. Her jacket still hung where she'd left it. Everything looked normal, which made the absence louder. I sat at the kitchen table and replayed the night, not to torture myself, but to analyze it. There was no confusion left to untangle, no misunderstanding to correct. What had happened was clean, deliberate, public. I didn't hate her in that moment. I understood her. People test boundaries when they believe they exist without consequence. They step further each time, not because they're evil, but because no one stops them. Love without boundaries doesn't create intimacy, it creates permission. I realized then that my silence in the marriage hadn't been strained, it had been accommodation. I'd trusted respect would maintain itself. It doesn't. Respect must be protected. Sometimes by walking away. My phone vibrated once, a message preview appeared on the screen, then vanished before I opened it. I didn't need to read it. Explanations arrive after decisions, not before. I made one of my own. No confrontation, no pleading, no dramatic exits. Those things feed egos. They give the other person a stage to justify themselves. I wouldn't offer that. I stood, poured a glass of water, and drank it slowly. My pulse was steady now. The pressure in my chest had eased into something colder, clearer, resolve. I wasn't planning revenge. I didn't need it. Revenge is noisy and what I needed was alignment between who I was and what I would tolerate. The truth settled in, calm and undeniable. Once respect is broken, it doesn't return the way it left. You can glue it back together, but the cracks always show. I looked around the apartment one last time that night, not with grief, but with acceptance. Some systems fail because they're attacked. Others fail because they're ignored for too long. I turned off the lights and went to bed alone. Not abandoned, not defeated, just awake. Silence, I understood now, was not weakness. It was preparation. Morning came without drama. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, steady and impartial. I woke before my alarm. Mind clear, body calm. There was no rush in my only direction. I showered, dressed, and drank my coffee the way I always did. Routine isn't denial, it's control. At my desk, the systems greeted me like they always had. Dashboards lit up. Permissions listed themselves neatly. Names, roles, access levels, everything reduced to logic. This was my language. I didn't act emotionally. I acted procedurally. First, I separated personal from professional. There are rules for a reason, and I follow them. Every change I made was justified, documented, and compliant. No shortcuts, no spite. Zara's access was linked to trust. Shared cards, shared permissions, shared conveniences that exist only when two people move as one. I revoked what no longer applied. One click or digital key to the apartment complex expired. Temporary access removed. Logs updated automatically. No alerts sent. Another click. The shared expense card tied to my account was deactivated. Not frozen, terminated. A quiet change. Effective immediately. Another. Her access to my company's executive areas granted as a courtesy was withdrawn. That one required approval. I approved it myself. My name appeared on the authorization line. Clean. Professional. I paused between actions. Not out of hesitation, but precision. Each adjustment aligned reality with truth. Trust had ended. Privilege followed. There were no messages from me. No explanations. Systems don't argue. They enforce. I imagined the morning unfolding elsewhere. Doors that didn't open. Transactions that didn't clear. A pause at a gate that had always waved her through. Confusion blooming slowly, like someone pressing a button twice, then a third time, expecting a different result. I felt nothing sharp. No thrill, no cruelty, only balance. At work, I attended meetings, took notes, answered questions. No one noticed anything unusual. They never do. Systems fail quietly before people understand what's wrong. My phone vibrated again. Missed call, then another. I placed it face down and continued typing. Chaos is loud. Control is silent. By noon, alerts began to register not for me, but for others. A denied access request here. A flagged credential there. All normal, all handled by the processes I designed. Someone knocked on my office door. Quick question, they said. Victor Hale is having trouble with a guest access issue. I looked up calmly. I'll review it, I said. If the access isn't valid, it won't be restored. They nodded and left. No argument. Policy was policy. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded, and waited. The world runs on assumptions, one of them being that access, once granted, is permanent. It isn't. It's conditional. It always has been. What I'd done wasn't punishment. It was alignment. When trust is removed, access follows. When access is removed, reality changes. I returned to my screen, the hum of the system steady and obedient. Somewhere else, confusion was turning into panic, and I was perfectly calm. The first call came just after 9. I was in a meeting listening to a discussion about quarterly risk assessments when my phone vibrated against the table. I didn't look at it. I didn't need to. I already knew who it was. Outside, the city was moving at its usual pace. Doors opening, elevators rising, transactions clearing. For most people, systems worked exactly as expected. For them, they didn't. Zara stood in front of our apartment building that morning, swiping her card again and again. The reader blinked red. No error message, no explanation, just refusal. She checked the card, turned it over, tried again. Same result. She called me. Straight to voicemail. Across town, Victor Hale faced his own pause. The private garage gate hesitated, then stopped halfway through its cycle. A security guard approached, apologetic but firm. Your guest access isn't valid, sir. Guest Victor frowned. He wasn't used to that word applying to anyone near him. He made a call. Then another. Assistants scrambled. Permissions were checked. Nothing changed. Power, when questioned, always assumes it's a mistake. Zara tried the apartment door one last time. It didn't budge. Her phone buzzed with declined transaction notifications. Coffee, ride, a purchase she hadn't thought twice about before. Each denial was small, almost polite. She messaged me, then again, then called. Silence answered every attempt. The realization didn't hit all at once. It arrived piece by piece, like a system booting into an unfamiliar mode. This wasn't an argument waiting to happen. This wasn't a dramatic standoff. This was final. At the office, Victor finally requested a direct review. There must be an error, he said, irritation barely contained. Fix it. The technician checked the logs, then froze. Sir, the access was revoked. Approved and documented. By who? My name landed on the screen. For the first time, Victor paused. Not because he feared me, but because limits had appeared where none had existed before. His authority had reached a boundary, and the boundary hadn't moved. He didn't call me. He understood enough to know that demanding wouldn't help. Zara, on the other hand, kept calling. Her messages shifted in tone: confusion to frustration, frustration to fear, no accusations, no apologies either, just the growing understanding that silence wasn't a tactic anymore, it was an answer. I watched none of it unfold directly. I didn't need to. Systems report outcomes, not emotions. And the outcome was clear. By afternoon, the noise quieted. Calls stopped, messages slowed, then ceased. People adapt quickly when they realize resistance is pointless. I didn't celebrate. Justice doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't raise its voice. It restores balance and steps back. What happened that morning wasn't revenge. It was consequence. No doors slammed, no insults traded, no public humiliation returned, just the removal of what no longer belonged. And in that quiet correction, something shifted, not just for them, but for me. The day continued. Systems stabilized. And for the first time in a long while, so did I. By evening, the storm had burned itself out. There were no more calls, no new messages lighting up my screen. Silence had returned, not the heavy kind from the night before, but something cleaner, settled like dust finally falling after a collapse. I sat at my desk long after work ended, the office nearly empty, lights dimmed automatically as people logged off and left. Systems don't cling. When a process ends, they move on. People should learn from that. I typed one message, short, precise, not an opening and ending. I've revoked access tied to shared trust. There's nothing to discuss. Please arrange to collect your personal items through the building manager. I read it once. No edits, no explanations layered on top. Then I sent it. That was it. No accusations, no defense, no attempt to be understood. Understanding was no longer required. I expected something after relief, maybe sadness, maybe anger, finally breaking through. None of it came. What I felt instead was space. Emotional room I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I drove home and packed a small bag, not to leave, but to simplify. Some things would be handled later. Tonight, I wanted quiet. I left the apartment lights off, opened the windows, and let the city breathe through the rooms. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for someone else's mood to decide my evening. I thought about the man I'd been at the party, the one standing still while the room moved around him. I realized something then. I hadn't been humiliated. I'd been clarified. The humiliation belonged to people who trade loyalty for attention and call it freedom. It belonged to men who mistake influence for ownership, not to someone who can walk away without leaving wreckage behind. Zara replied once, a paragraph. Explanations, regret shaped carefully enough to avoid responsibility. I didn't read past the first few lines. Not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't change anything. I archived the message and locked the phone. That was the moment peace arrived. Not happiness. Not yet. Peace is quieter than that. It's the absence of internal conflict. The feeling that your actions and values finally match. I stood by the window and watched lights turn on across the city, one by one. Each apartment its own story, its own rules, its own failures and repairs. Walking away doesn't mean you lost. Sometimes it means you refused to lose yourself. I didn't wish them harm. I didn't need closure beyond what I'd already given myself. Closure isn't a conversation, it's a decision. That night, I slept deeply. No replaying scenes. No imaginary arguments. No longing for a version of the past that didn't exist anymore. In the morning, I would continue. Work, life, systems. But something fundamental had changed. I had chosen myself not out of bitterness, but out of respect. And that choice, I knew, would outlast any apology that came too late. Let me speak plainly, because I've learned that the truth isn't always comfortable, but it is always necessary. I'm Ayan Malik. I'm the man nobody noticed at a party, the man whose systems kept buildings, offices, and privileges running and, for one morning, decided they wouldn't. But this isn't about me. It's about a lesson that costs some of us everything before we finally understand it. Respect is earned, maintained, and defended. Love without boundaries invites betrayal. It doesn't matter how many years you've invested, how many promises were whispered in the quiet hours, or how safe you believed your heart to be. Freedom without consequence doesn't breed loyalty, it breeds entitlement. People will step further than you ever imagined if you leave the gates open, assuming you'll never close them. And when they do, it's not dramatic, it's simple, it's logical. Like any system running on access, if you remove permission, nothing works anymore. I didn't react at the party because I understood that my silence carried power. Many would see silence as weakness, as submission, or even as ignorance. They would mistake it for absence. But the truth is far subtler. Silence can be a shield. Silence can be discipline. Silence can be preparation. Reacting too soon, begging, shouting, or confronting often feeds the very chaos you hope to prevent. Discipline, patience, and clarity of purpose are far more formidable than noise. When my wife left that night, it was public, undeniable, irreversible. I could have followed her. I could have argued, explained, or demanded. I could have humiliated myself or tried to reclaim what was already gone. But I didn't, because dignity doesn't argue, it doesn't plead, it doesn't shrink in the face of betrayal. It remains intact, quietly, and chooses action where action matters, not where emotion dictates. By the morning, doors refused to open, cards failed to work, and privileges dissolved in naught, because I sought revenge. But because systems obey logic, not sentiment. The CEO discovered limits he had never imagined. My wife discovered that silence was no longer empty, it was final. The lesson was clear. Respect, once broken, rarely returns. And even if it does, it is never whole again. Walking away can be victory. Victory isn't about seeing the other person stumble. Victory is knowing you didn't compromise your values. Victory is reclaiming the space in your life that allows you to breathe without fear or resentment. True strength doesn't need applause, confrontation, or vindication. It needs clarity, patience, and self-respect. Now I speak directly to you. The one reading this, have you ever been underestimated because you stayed silent? Have you ever felt invisible, overlooked, or dismissed while others claimed what you had built, assumed, or trusted? Understand this. Your silence is not weakness. Your boundaries are not cruelty. Your self-respect is your power. You don't need permission to protect yourself. You don't need approval to walk away, and you don't need validation to know your value. The world will always try to test you. It will push, pry, and manipulate, but how you respond defines your strength. The choice is yours. Expose betrayal and chaos, or reclaim control with quiet dignity. If you believe in the power of silence, discipline, and walking away with respect, comment silence below. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that. Staying calm, patient, and self-aware can be stronger than rage. Reflect on the lessons I've learned the hard way. Love without boundaries invites betrayal. Silence isn't surrender. Respect, once broken, rarely returns. Walking away can be the greatest victory of all. The doors will always open for those who hold themselves accountable, but they will close, permanently, for those who betray trust. Choose wisely. Choose dignity. Choose yourself. Your silence can be your strength. Comment silence if you agree. Share this if someone you know needs to see that strength doesn't always shout, it endures.